Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Dan DiFrancesco, the lead writer for our daily newsletter, BI Today. So 2 days, 5 companies, more than $15 trillion in market cap. It's been quite the past few days for big tech as Q1 earnings have rolled in for Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Microsoft. As hectic as it has been over the past 44 hours or so, it's also been a chance for us to put all of these giants up against each other. We get to see which ones businesses are growing and which ones aren't. And most importantly, we get an update on these pricey AI bets. So we're going to talk about all that today, but here's the deal. So this is a live Q&A and we need your help. So drop your questions you have about big tech in the comments, in the chat, and we'll try to get to them all. Don't be bashful. There is no such thing as a dumb question. Trust me, I have certainly tried. But it's time to bring in the real star of the show. His Tech Memo newsletter lands in your inbox every Friday morning, but he's #1 in your hearts, the great Ali Barr. Ali, how are we doing today?
Good morning. I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So, like I said off the top, we've seen Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Microsoft all report earnings. But who was on the hot seat coming into earnings? We asked our LinkedIn audience which company they thought had the most to prove coming into earnings. We could only include 4 options, so we had to drop Apple. Don't blame us, blame LinkedIn. And the results show that, boom, 46% say Meta had the most to prove coming into earnings season. Ali, what's your take on that? Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think that's smart, and it was proved out, right? Meta fell quite hard after the results, and I think the main difference between Meta and those other 3 companies is Meta doesn't have a cloud business. So when Meta says, "Oh, we're going to spend over $100 billion this year on AI capex," investors just can't see as much of an obvious return from that investment as they do from Google or Amazon or Microsoft, because those 3 companies have obviously cloud businesses, and basically you get all the compute infrastructure in, you build the data center, that's all very expensive, but then you get to rent that out as a computing service, and that usually generates a return much more quickly, and Wall Street understands that quite well, and it's been a business for 20 years, so they kind of understand it. Meta is more like, well, you can make your ad business more efficient, but we already kind of knew you were doing that. So what else are you going to do? And I think that's harder.
Yeah,
That's a harder question to
the
answer.
cloud business absolutely has been a key takeaway, I think, from the past 2 days. And that kind of gets me to what I think is the biggest takeaway, right? So we had all these companies report. A lot of them were flat, but there was one, belle of the ball in the eyes of the investors, and that was Alphabet. It's up roughly 9-10% since it posted earnings Wednesday afternoon. I know that gets into the whole cloud debate, but specifically, what was it about Alphabet that made it stand out so much?
Yeah, I think that they have what I call AI building blocks. They have the most AI building blocks of anyone. So if you think about a company like well, OpenAI is like a really great comparison, but you can also look at Amazon and Microsoft. Google just has everything. So they kind of control and trade energy, for instance, which seems wild for an internet company. And that energy gets pumped into their data centers. They have the most data centers in the world. They have probably the most GPUs and similar chips in the world of anyone as well. And then they have, obviously massive reach, massive scale, loads and loads of data and things like that. So when you put all that together, it has the most ingredients for success in AI. And if you look at the other companies, they have at least 1 or 2 things missing versus Google.
And they've been built. I know you were early on this game, so I want to give you credit. But they've been building towards this moment for a while. I mean, this is. I think I'm gonna quote one of your old pieces. This is like 25 years in the making that Alphabet. I keep saying Apple. That Alphabet has been trying to get to this spot, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're probably just making me look really old now, but yeah, yeah. I mean, I covered Google and the cloud a very, very long time ago, and even if you look at like an old video of Larry Page, and I think it was the year 2000, he was being interviewed. Um, on a big TV show, and one of the first things he was talking about was AI, and that was in the year 2000. And I was, even when I went back and looked at that, I was kind of surprised by how much he was talking about it even then. It's pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
You know what? It's not that you're old, it's that you were a fan of the band before it was popular. It's the cool thing. Like,
That's what I always tell my kids.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll learn one day. So the other thing that stood out to me, at least personally, was subscription business was up 19%, and they accredited that to AI, at least partially, which investors, analysts, they're so keen to see what's the ROI here. That felt like a real tangible thing that Alphabet could point to. That was a big win for them.
Yeah, and actually, that's like, that goes back to the meta point, I think, right? You have investors understand, buy GPUs, have a cloud service, rent them out. They understand that return on investment, but this is a non-cloud example. So I think some of that will be things like Gemini, which is like a really powerful AI chatbot. If you want to really access the good stuff of Gemini, you have to pay, and Google has kind of cleverly woven it into existing subscriptions. But I think it's getting people to pay $20 a month, maybe more, and you get more access to Gemini. So I think that has started to work really well, as you pointed out.
Yeah, and you mentioned Gemini. The other kind of thing that caught a couple people's eyes was the mention that ads could come to the Gemini app. I know that in AI in general, they're starting to experiment with implementing ads, but specifically with the Gemini app, the chief business officer, said, hey, if done well, ads can be really valuable. And God only knows, Google knows that. So that's another interesting twist or wrinkle to like the future of AI. We're gonna start seeing, ads in a lot of the chatbots that we're using.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually quite controversial because, OpenAI started introducing them a few months ago. And then the arch rival Anthropic, which is the Claude chatbot, that they've basically sworn off ads. And I think it's kind of funny and ironic that one of the biggest funders of Anthropic is actually Google, which is the world's largest advertising company. So have they sworn off ads? I don't know. Anyway, there are no ads in Claude, but if you look at the other two biggest chatbots in the world, in the Western world anyway, right. Those probably will end up with ads, and it's an interesting debate about how you're going to show ads like that, because there's just one answer, right? Unlike a search result or like a social media page where it's flowing by.
You can't list that sponsor up top. It makes it very tricky. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, very, 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 very tricky. So I think that's going to be a challenge. But Google's probably the best placed company in the world to like deal with that. I
want to talk about the other cloud providers. Before I get to that, though, a reminder: if you're watching this, ask questions. Right? We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to, we have the A's, but we need the Q's. So bring on the questions. But let's pivot now to Amazon. So AWS, best cloud growth since 2022, good, but maybe not good enough?
Yeah, 28% is great. And actually, if you look at it, that they are the biggest cloud provider by quite clearly still. But if you look at the two rivals behind it, I think Microsoft was 39%, 38% growth. And Google was wild, like 68% growth year over year. So they're kind of catching. So I'd say that Amazon has certainly improved versus, let's say, a year ago when people were really asking whether they were late on AI. And I think they partnered with Anthropic, and that's gone really, really well on the cloud side. So I think they've certainly answered the question about whether they were very, very far behind. I think they're still not blowing it out of the water like Google is. Admittedly, Google's still smaller, so it's easier to grow in a percentage way. But yeah, I think like really, really solid. Really solid.
Maybe the long play here for Amazon, and you're the expert, so you tell me, caught a lot of people's eyes the fact that they are now talking about within the next couple of years they could start selling their Trainium AI chips. That's something that they're not currently doing, but that they would put them in direct competition with folks like NVIDIA, and obviously that's been a very good business for NVIDIA. It feels like that's a down the road option, but it's potentially a massive gold mine for them. So maybe they don't necessarily have the big wins that maybe someone like Alphabet put up early, but there's a path to some real explosive growth for them, right?
Yeah, and I think the thing that caught people's eye on the call especially is that Andy Jassy's CEO But really, the only reason they're thinking about doing this is because there's so much demand for AI chips and AI compute in general, and so Amazon has the biggest cloud service. That they're seeing so much demand for that they're actually considering taking this in-house AI chip and actually giving it to other people to use themselves, which is a radical business change for AWS. Really, really different. So I think it speaks to just the level of demand they're seeing. They're like, well, I think the CEO said something like the demand for Trainium chips just through the cloud service was like booked out a few years ahead, 3 times over. So I think this is probably another way to satisfy that demand. And yeah, like you say, kind of a brand new business, which
Why
is
not
super
us,
interesting.
right? If everybody's making money, why can't we make money? I mean, if it's there for the taking. Let's.
Now, I would say, I mean, from a journalist point of view, like one of the most interesting parts of that is that Nvidia is still a huge supplier, and Amazon relies on Nvidia selling them GPUs. So, like Jensen Huang can't be happy with this. So we love that tension.
Yeah, it'll plenty of fodder for our newsletters for sure. Let's round it out with the third big cloud provider, Microsoft. So they had the big capex headline number talking about upping the spending to 190 billion. I guess just any initial takeaways on that, because that was kind of, we're always looking at capex spending, and that was the big number that popped this earnings.
Yeah, they were the biggest surprise, I would say, probably biggest increase. And I think one, it shows that there's a lot of AI demand. Microsoft has been a bit cautious sometime from time to time over the past 2 years on this type of thing, but now they're really really going for it again. So I think that shows how much increase in demand there's been just this year for a lot of different AI services. I would say one of the most interesting things about it is that the CFO on the call, Amy Hood, she called out that yes, we're doing a lot more capex this year, but 25 billion of that is just on component prices, which is things like memory chips, mostly memory chips, but other stuff too. So if you look at it, maybe they increased capex by maybe 35 billion, and 25 billion of that is just they're paying more, they're paying higher prices to hard drive makers and things like that, Samsung, people like that, Micron. So
It's
so if you're
refreshing, right?
talking
I think.
about pure like how much new AI capacity is Microsoft adding, it's
Right.
maybe not as much as it looks.
It's refreshing, I suppose. All of us, everything's costing more for everybody these days, and even if you're, a massive trillion-dollar company, you have to deal with rising costs, just
Oh,
like the
I
rest of
feel so
us.
sorry for Microsoft.
I know. Well, tiny violin I'm playing for them. I want to talk. So you mentioned also they talked about headcount because they've tried to offer some early retirements to folks, and I believe it was the CFO also mentioned that they're not done cutting headcount. And we have a question from Amanda in New York, who wants to get at a bigger question of: do you think in a lot of these attributing layoffs or reductions to force AI adoption is a valid rationale, or is it just a convenient justification? Is AI the Trojan horse that a lot of these companies are getting their layoffs in?
I think that's a great question, and I think we've debated this a lot this year across the newsroom. I would say one of the big drivers is that big tech companies overhired, obviously with hindsight, overhired during the pandemic massively, and I think some of that is being unwound. But I would also say that it is true that if you're Microsoft, which is basically the world's biggest software maker, software now can be made quicker and arguably easier using these AI coding tools. So then the question is, 10 years ago, if you needed to make a lot of software, you had to hire a lot of very, very smart, expensive engineers out of college or from somewhere else. And that really defined Silicon Valley for a decade. And now I think the edge, at least the edge of that has come off. And now Microsoft's, like if you're Microsoft now, you're like, well, should we go hire 20,000 more engineers, or should we should at least try these tools with the amazingly smart people we've already got. So I think that changes the dynamic. And then I think you also add, I don't think this applies to Microsoft, but it might apply to some tech companies where if you're spending 100 billion a year on AI capex and your cash flow is going negative or under a lot of stress. Investors don't like that. So if you cut some jobs and try and get your profit margins up that way, and it doesn't, you take a risk and roll the dice, and if that ends up not hurting revenue too much, then you're probably going to do that again, right?
Well, you mentioned spending, and that gets me to one of my favorite. I love a person that's committed to a bit, and no one is committed to a bit more than Mark Zuckerberg spending big on AI, regardless of what his investors say, what everybody else says. The man loves to spend big on AI. He's not backing down. He said he's going to do it. In the meantime, to what we're talking about, they've also announced that job cuts are coming, roughly 10%, May 20th, and that might not even be the end of it. We had some reporting on an internal meeting where basically it was kind of like a shoulder shrug, like, yeah, we can't promise that this is going to be the end. I guess just big picture, like, if anything, Meta has been committed to this approach. They haven't backed down, so there is that. But what is your takeaway from another earnings where Zuck is very adamant that we're going to spend?
I think if you look at the 3, 4, 5 huge tech companies, well, four especially the ones we're talking about now, like Mark Zuckerberg's really the only founder left in charge. So like he can, and he has voting stock and things like that, a lot of control. So he can really let loose a lot more, I think, on earnings calls and other things too, and make these really big calls. So it probably comes off as a bit harsh, and especially for employees who are going to be worried, especially for the next few weeks. That's really not nice. But again, I think I'd go back to the bigger questions about Meta on the capex AI spending and how it's going to get a return. I think if you want a message to Wall Street that you're being really, really razor focused on making sure your company's efficient, you're going to make profits in the future and right now. So I think some of that signaling about efficiency on the workforce, I think might help when investors are like, well, how are you going to make a return on this? You don't have a cloud business. So I think that helps Meta somewhat with investors.
They want to see the receipts. Yeah, let's shift now gears a little bit into Apple. Before you get that, again, reminder, send questions through in the chat. However, happy to kind of answer anything that's top of mind for you folks. But so Apple's a little bit of its own animal, right? Very different approach to AI. But the big news off the top is saying goodbye to Tim Apple and saying hello to John Apple. What did you make of his swan song here?
Tim Cook, not a founder, but one of the most amazing CEOs in tech history, right? He's added way more value to Apple than Steve Jobs, which is like probably you're not allowed to say that in Silicon Valley, but it's true. So yeah, I think he's done amazingly well. I think John Ternus is more of a product person, whereas Tim Cook was supply chain operations. So he took Steve Jobs' inventions and ideas, and then he ran them amazingly well, and like the supply chain's incredible. The profit margins are insane.
He was the year of efficiency. Gone well. I think this he was the year of efficiency before efficiency. Like he was the OG efficiency person.
Exactly, the decade of efficiency. Yeah. The decade of efficiency. But I think Ternus is more of a product guy. So I think there might be some more product innovation coming from there, which I think Apple fans would really like to see, and I think investors would like to see it too. There hasn't been a lot of like a really, I mean, it's hard to come up with another iPhone. That's probably the best tech product that's ever been made, but something with the same impact that kind of changes the way we live our lives. We haven't seen that yet again from Apple. So maybe something might come from John Ternus.
Well, to that point, right, and we'll quickly touch on this, and then we have some questions I want to get to, is there's a little thing that investors got very excited about, the fact that Apple has decided it will no longer be net cash neutral. Real quick, you were mentioning before, why do you think that could basically means they're going to have more cash on hand, and you think that could point to potentially something to that space, correct?
Yeah, maybe. I think first of all, it fits with the broader narrative, which is that the other four companies we've spoken about today are just absolutely splurging on AI, capex, and data centers and things like that. Apple has actively not done that. So while cash flows going more negative for a lot of these other companies, and cash levels are probably coming down a little bit, Apple's going to increase cash. So that could be a kind of Warren Buffett-esque like contrarian play. So if this AI bubble doesn't work out as some people expect, and there's some blood on the street, Apple has a lot more cash to it could scoop up some AI companies or other companies on the cheap.
Sure.
That's one point. And then I would say it might also mean sometimes when Apple is going to try and innovate in new ways, it buys a bunch of interesting startups in the space. So it could be if they have more cash on hand, it could be that they're gearing up for some more acquisitions, which could be pretty exciting.
Could be more fodder for us. So a question from the YouTube audience. You had mentioned earlier about two of the biggest chatbots in the Western world. How do they compare to those in the rest of the world, right? I think we always focus a lot on, what's happening in the US, and rightfully so. That's a massive market. But what about beyond our own borders when it comes to the AI chatbots? I don't know if you have a perspective on that.
Yeah, there's one called Manus, which is super interesting, which is a formerly Chinese company. They moved to Singapore, and Meta tried to buy them. Actually, did buy them, but the Chinese government's kind of
said not so fast
on that. That one is kind of a combo of a chatbot, and it has coding ability too. So actually, one of our colleagues, Dan, recently vibe coded a training fitness app using Manus, which I was kind of surprised with, and it worked really, really well. And then I would say, especially in the open source realm, so making a really complicated, powerful AI model, but making the weights and the ingredients available freely to everyone. That is something that the big AI companies in the US have not done as well as companies like Alibaba and DeepSeek in China. So the DeepSeek has a chatbot. It's super good too. Alibaba has an AI model called Qwen, which is really, really great, and it's open source. So I think that there's, especially in China, there's been some really, really incredible inventiveness, and actually, without all the fancy GPUs that the American companies get access to, like the Chinese AI companies have actually produced some amazing AI models and chatbots without that, which is impressive.
Let's stay abroad for a quick second. Another viewer from South Africa, global. This is a global operation we got going on. They want to know about AI usage trends in developing markets, and specifically how, as a communication strategist, they should approach kind of the next few quarters. I will say, just my perspective on it, and the people I talk to, I feel like in a lot of the developing markets, there's a lot more excitement about AI usage because it's a way to kind of jump ahead, where there's so much legacy in developed markets like ourselves, where people are a lot worried about job loss and what's going to happen. For some of these developing markets, it's like, this is a shortcut now that we can kind of catch up, and we don't have to worry about knocking down a lot of, or disrupting the foundations that a lot of the more developed markets. But I don't know if you have a different perspective or thoughts on what it means for the more developing markets.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking now about this is going to age me as well, Dan, but the telecom era. So when mobile came out in the developing world, they actually skipped a couple of generations of telecom technology. That there wasn't a lot of wired based telecom, and they just went straight to mobile, and the benefits, I think, were really huge, and they didn't have to make these massive physical investments in fiber optics and things like that. So I think maybe we're seeing a similar thing now, and I think there's a lot of also voice based. If you look at the Indian market, which is like absolutely massive. An AI founder was actually telling me recently that I think it's something like 60% of all WhatsApp interactions now in India, and WhatsApp's huge in India, are actually voice-based, people speaking into the WhatsApp app with each other and sending messages that way. And I think that for instance, for Meta could be really big, because voice recognition and using voice in AI is actually, I think, going to be it's a hard technical problem, and I think Meta does it pretty well. So I think that's probably gonna really help with Meta's engagement in that country and elsewhere.
Voice and AI, we had a great story about a reporter that published today using training of AI voice agent to actually do their job. It didn't turn out well, but it was great. It was a lot of fun. Ended up hanging up on her boss. So Amanda Hoover over on the discourse team, definitely worth a read. Another forward-looking question from the YouTube audience. So they ask, we've seen this massive rise in memory companies. We talked a little bit about memory. 3,000% plus gain in 1 year from SanDisk, Micron on a similar trajectory. Is this sustainable, right? I think it's easy just to point at something that's doing really well and saying it's a bubble, but is it the next benefactor of the AI rollout? What's your thoughts on kind of what we've seen in this crazy rise of these memory companies?
Yeah, it's absolutely astounding. I think SanDisk reported late yesterday, and these chip companies, especially memory chips, they're the classic semiconductor boom and bust cycle. So DRAM, especially, which is kind of the more basic memory chip, that one kind of has always been more of a commodity. So when demand goes up and things are great in the tech industry, prices rise. And then these producers actually manufacture more supply, and then demand kind of levels off, and then there's too much supply, and then the prices absolutely crash. Investors really don't like that. So these companies have always been valued much lower than other steadier tech businesses. And now, again, AI is changing all this, at least for now. And it's very hard to know what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years. But right now, SanDisk is signing, just as an example, it's signing multi-year contracts at higher prices, I suspect, with some of these giant AI and tech companies that need memory chips for long periods for data centers. So at least for now, they are proving that this previous boom bust cycle, at least for the next 4 or 5 years, they've locked in these contracts, so that at very high prices. So that provides a steadier, much more profitable business. Now, you could, in theory, right, companies like OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, super smart. There's a core thing in the way that AI models work where you need a massive amount of memory to make GPUs work and send the data back and forth between GPUs. That's called the memory bottleneck. Now, if the geniuses at Google and these other places come up with a way to do AI models that doesn't require this, then you could really see demand crash again. So that's one of the risks, where right now Google and all these tech companies are spending hundreds of billions of dollars. They don't want to do that. So they're going to go to their software innovation and their AI model innovation. Right. And they're going to find ways of designing these things to work more efficiently. So I'd say that's the risk.
Yeah. And another kind of question that we got about these kind of secondary or tertiary effects, Julie asked about, there's this mad dash to build these data centers, but obviously they need to be powered, right? And how does that impact the ROI on these prospective massive data center builds? I think, we were talking before, and you're hearing a lot of talk about nuclear power. It's funny, I come from a family raised in nuclear power. I was very pro-nuclear power growing up. I know that's a big thing, but that takes time, right? We're seeing a lot of these power plants that have been bought, that have been decommissioned. It's going to take years to get them up and running or to build them from scratch. I know the other, even more pie in the sky is fusion energy, which is something that's been talked about for years. Haven't really made too much progress, but you never know. I watched Oppenheimer, crazier things have happened. But I don't know if you have thoughts on yes, we need to build data centers, but we also need the power to empower or power these data centers as well.
Yeah, I think that AI bottlenecks, that there's a growing list of AI bottlenecks that's slowing down the building of data centers and getting them up and running. And I'd say energy is probably the biggest one. Memory chips are one, but I'd say energy is much bigger. To your point, I think maybe SanDisk and Micron can make a lot more memory chips in maybe 1 or 2 years, but actually, especially in the US, changing the electricity grid to make sure we have more energy and building more capacity is going to take a very long time. So, and I think right now, similarly with memory chips, right, the answer is you pay more, and so prices are going up, so capex is going up because tech companies are paying more. Now, in theory, right, if you're paying more to build an AI data center, your return on investment might be less because you're spending more. That makes perfect sense. So I think on the energy side, the same thing's happening. Like, it's wild. Gas turbines, natural gas turbines are one of the quicker ways to do it. So you can't connect to the grid, so you buy a bunch of gas turbines and do it behind the meter. So just build them on site, and they send power to the data center, and off you go. I'm pretty sure if you ordered a gas turbine now, you would get it in 2030, and you'd be paying probably 2 or 3 times what you were paying 5 years ago for it. So even that is, delayed and ridiculous prices.
Yeah. Well,
so yeah, it's a good
gas prices are very
point.
much under control and everything, so there's no issue there. There's no massive, conflict that's putting that at risk either. The Sissy from Franklin, Tennessee, had an interesting question about AI is growing so quickly, right? I mean, just from a couple of years ago, what these chatbots were capable of to now is it's insane. What do you think the world's going to look like in the next year? I can just start, and I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer. I don't know what we're going to do about all these junior jobs. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind, and I've yet to get a good response from an executive about how all of this doesn't really screw people that are coming out of college looking for jobs. I know you have some older kids. My kids are much younger, so by then none of us will maybe be working when they're trying to look for a job. But that's my biggest concern is a year from now, it's bad enough for the kids that are graduating next month, but for the kids, the juniors that are about to be seniors, it's pretty brutal. But I don't know, maybe do you have more optimistic? Can we have a lighter note on this Friday before we all head to happy hour?
Yeah, I think that one way to think about it is that when Google or another company builds a new data center and buys loads and loads of GPUs and sets all that up, that is basically just buying more computers and literally millions of computers. So there will be a lot more computers in the world in the future, and no matter what AI can and can't do, you will need computer scientists to understand how those computers work. So from a very broad perspective, if you want to study computer science, and in 5 or 10 years time there's going to be millions more computers in the world, that makes sense to me. Now, purely writing software, is that going to change? I think that's already changing, right? So but I think it's still true that you can ask an AI coding tool like Cursor to write software for you, but you actually have to be able to know what you want and how to get there, so that when it does the code, you can say, oh no, it went off on a tangent. I actually meant it needs to be here, not there. Mm-hmm. And I've spoken to a lot of very, very experienced software developers who are blown away by these AI coding tools, but they're like, but I still need to know what to ask it and how to do it and what the outputs are, right? So maybe the actual pure number demand for software engineers is leveling off or going down a bit, but I'm hopeful for those professions for sure, and those are the ones that are being hit the most
for sure.
right now.
We've talked a lot, obviously, about AI, and of course, it's the biggest story going. But Simon from Colorado Springs wants to know what's coming next. What's after AI? Let's really jump ahead. I'll let you. I mean, we both had the same idea when we were talking about this before, but I'll let you take the cake about what the new big dog is coming around the corner.
Yeah, I think we both agree quantum computing is the next thing, mm-hmm. right?
Right. Yeah. I mean,
what do you think about that?
Look, I've been, covering financial tech one degree or another since 2014, so over a decade. I don't have as many years under my belt as you. And quantum was kind of mentioned a lot even back then. And you'd see these weird pictures of these things that look like kind of like chandeliers, and they say this is the future. And finance is very excited about what quantum computing can do as far as like cracking the code on getting alpha. I think there's still a lot we need to do to get there, resource-wise. Like, it's just, I could try to wrap my head around it, but it would probably explode. But I don't know. What you again are closer to the space than me. What are your thoughts on how impactful it could be and what the timeline we're on for something like that is?
I mean, I agree. When we were both put on the spot, that's the thing that we both came up with. And the way I think about it is that I often have this discussion with my daughter, who's a mechanical engineer and not a huge fan of AI. And I always say, well, AI is actually just another way to do computing. So back in the day, you had your Intel laptop and it had a CPU in it, and it handled processes one at a time, and then GPUs come along and they can handle thousands or even millions of processes at the same time, and it basically made that computing process thousands and thousands of times quicker. And that's at its core what AI is. It's just a way to do computing way faster. So I see now, I'm not 100% sure whether quantum computing will actually work still. I think there's been some progress on that lately. But if it does, it's just another way to do computing, and again, thousands and thousands of times quicker. So I think that if it, again, I don't know whether it's actually going to work technically speaking, but if it does, I think that it will just leap up again.
Yeah.
Is that going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or never? I don't know. But
to your point, it's just like I'm a child of the 2000s and 90s. It's like Pokemon. It's like you evolve. Kind of, you go from like a Charmeleon to a to a Charizard, right? It's just like kind of that next evolution. I think one of the most interesting things about quantum I always hear is like the security risk, as far as like once it's really full powered and going, it can kind of break any encryption. People talk about risks to Bitcoin and kind of unpacking that. So, but again, it's like one of those things where every 6 months some paper comes out and people are like, we've cracked the code. And then somebody else comes over top and says, no, actually we didn't. It's a bunch of BS. So, I mean, who knows what to believe. Real quick, I wanted to, and again, if you have any last questions, fire them off quick before we let you all go to the pub. They are not public companies, but they very much want to be public companies soon, and they're very much in the public eye. OpenAI and Anthropic, we have to address them one way or another. So on OpenAI front, the big thing this week was, there's a report in Wall Street Journal, shy of revenue numbers, shy of user numbers, reported issues between the CEO, CFO. Then very quickly, no, that's not an issue. Story in Bloomberg, I think it was yesterday or today, CFO saying, no, we're all on the same page. You've written about OpenAI a lot. Any thoughts on what's going on there? Is it hitting a wall, or is it right on track? What's your big takeaways from what's been another busy week for OpenAI in the news?
I think if Anthropic did not exist, I think people would think that OpenAI is doing pretty solidly right now. I think it's not great that they were supposed to get to 1 billion weekly average users either at the end of last year or early this year. It's not great that they have not announced that yet.
Ali, that's a stretch goal.
But if you look at Anthropic this year, I think their revenue just in a few months has gone from, I think, maybe 8 billion, on an annual run rate to 30 billion. And that is just absolutely astounding. And obviously some of that has come from OpenAI. Customers who probably would have gone to OpenAI are using Anthropic's AI models and tools. So I think right now, Anthropic is winning in the eyes of investors, and maybe looks a bit better of a bet for an IPO sooner. But I think things can change very, very quickly in AI. I think there's going to be a whole new set of AI models that are coming out in the next 6 months or so that are built on a new generation of NVIDIA GPUs. Most people in the industry think those models are going to be, again, like a lot better. And so that's going to just completely shake things up all over again.
Yeah, it definitely feels like Anthropic's having a moment, as the kids would say, which brings me to probably what's been one of my favorite stories in the tech verse, is how crazy people are going over trying to get access to Anthropic equity. So the big story was a beautiful house in California. I think it was like 4.5 million, way more than I could ever afford. This person was willing to trade it for Anthropic shares, and then we did some more reporting about all the other things, like offering positions at their firms. So, Ali Bar, what would you be willing to give up for some Anthropic shares?
I have a bike that I've been trying to sell on Craigslist. It's been weeks, no one's bought it. What else? Yeah, I was gonna say that maybe I'd give up my new puppy, but that's not true. I already love him so much. So yeah, I mean, actually, I should make a serious point. As financial journalists, we're not allowed to own individual stocks,
This is
which is
true.
good.
This is true. So
So
it's
I
null
wouldn't
and
be able to
void.
do it anyway. But yeah, I'm too risk averse to do something like that, to be
There you
honest.
go.
How
All
about
right.
you?
For me, well, yeah, I was gonna make a joke about how, I have two daughters, so the one younger one I'm not as fond. I'm just kidding. I love them both. They're too young to watch anyway, so it doesn't matter, and it's fine. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm gonna take the out that you gave me and say, well, as financial journalists, we can't own, individual stocks, so I wouldn't even dream of it. So not for me. No thanks. I think we will leave it there. Ali, it's always a pleasure. If you haven't already, stop what you're doing. Go subscribe to this man's newsletter, Tech Memo, every Friday morning. It's the best. Thanks so much, Ali, for taking the time. And to everyone else, thanks for joining. Thanks for asking your questions. And until next time.